right, for class today, we are going to be talking about personality. And when I'm talking about personality, I am talking about the overall pattern, okay? The typical thoughts and emotional responses and behaviors that you have that are relatively stable across time and circumstance, okay? So when we were talking about the self, it was who are you? It's I am this, or I am this right now. Personality is the pattern of thinking and feeling and behaving that makes you you. It is I am this. Typically, I am that. So some people, you might say, typically, I am outgoing and adventurous. Some people might say, typically, I am quiet and thoughtful. Those are personality traits, okay? So when we're talking about the self, we're talking about the self concept. That's kind of like big picture. And personality is getting a little bit more kind of defined in a sense of the patterns that we follow throughout our life. And I will say, if you are interested in all in like child psychology and like development, you can actually figure out some of the personality characteristics that you will have just by how you acted as a baby. So even when you were growing up and you were a child, your temperament as a child will lead you into certain personality characteristics as a teenager and as an adult. So, and that's what I mean by relatively stable over time. If we experience big life events and traumatic experiences, personality can change, yes, but relatively, your personality is going to be pretty stable over time. And what I mean by across circumstances is that I know we talked a little bit about how we describe ourselves may change if we're with family or with we're friends. But in personality, we're gonna be kind of similar across those different circumstances. So no matter what situation you're in, you're going to be typically outgoing. You're going to be typically adventurous. Those personality traits are going to shine through no matter what circumstance you're in. So, in the past century, trying to understand personality and define personality has been kind of, I would say, hard. There's not necessarily one specific one that, well, we've kind of moved through different theories of how personality should be, what personality should be based on. And there's kind of four general approaches that we're going to talk about. Um, there is one main one that we use currently, but the thing is there's so many different personality tests out there and ideas of who we are and what our personality is based on that technically there's not one correct one. These are just different theories about how we describe who we are and the characteristics that we hold. So here's just a quick view of the different ones that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about the psychodynamic theory with Freud, the humanistic approaches with Carl Rogers. We're going to talk about the social cognitive approaches, and we're going to talk about characteristics like personality traits, the five-factor trait theory, where we just describe our personality and characteristics. So first, when we're talking about the psychodynamic theory, I will say that Sigmund Freud is a little controversial. And psychodynamic theory is not super well supported scientifically, but it has had an enormous influence over our psychological thinking for much of psychology's early history and like the personalities theory early history. And so that's why we're going to talk about this, is because this is kind of like, like the building blocks, the foundational part of it. So Sigmund Freud came up with this theory stating that the unconscious forces, our unconscious minds, okay, such as the wishes we hold, the desires, and hidden memories, is what is determining our behavior and influencing our personality. So this guy was all about the unconscious mind and how the unconscious mind is what is driving us and choosing kind of like how we behave. Oh, wait, hold on. So, like I said, Sigmund Freud is a little controversial. So, if you literally Google, did Sigmund Freud, all of these things come up. Did he marry his cousin? Did he have children? Did he sleep with his mother? Did he have a crush on his mom? Um, so like I said, he's kind of a controversial man. If you look deeper into it, he was also on a lot of cocaine whenever he was doing his psychodynamic theory. So this man was drugged up. He had some very controversial ideas come through. If you ever want to look into his Oedipus complex, which is basically all about how we try to marry our parents and kill off the partner that we think we're competing, or yeah, the parent that we think we're competing with. But yeah, this man was on a lot of drugs whenever he came up with this stuff. But anyways, psychodynamic theory. This is kind of an idea of the psychodynamic theory and how it placed the conscious and the unconscious mind. So we have things that we are consciously aware of, kind of like an iceberg, right? If you've ever watched the Titanic or if you know anything about the icebergs, we always think that the iceberg is, like really big on the surface, but truthfully, it's way deeper and it's way bigger under the surface, just like the psychodynamic theory. So we have these thoughts, we have these perceptions on the conscious level. So these are things that we are aware of. We are aware of our thoughts on things. We are aware of our perceptions because we are consciously aware of it. We have mental activity that's consisting of our thoughts and perceptions. Then we have the pre-conscious level, which consists of content that is not currently in our awareness, but can be brought to our awareness, okay? So if we think about this, memory, right? We talked about memory. The memories that we store, it's stored. It's not actively in our conscious, but it can be brought to our conscious, okay? So pre-conscious is I have knowledge hanging out in my brain, I have memory hanging out in my brain, and I can bring it up to this conscious level. And then lastly, we have this unconscious level, this really deep, right? This really deep unconscious level in our brain that contains material that the mind cannot easily retrieve. Okay? We are, I want to say, completely unaware of this, right? So instincts, fears, selfish motivations, just honestly, sometimes motivations in general, things that we're not actively thinking about our fears, we're not actively thinking about our instincts. Sometimes it is ingrained in us, or it's an unconscious fear we have, or an unconscious instinct that we're not even aware of. So that's this unconscious level. And Sigmund Freud thought that there was 3 structures of personality. We have the id, we have the superego, and these two are competing. Okay, so we have the id, which is a personality, a structure of our personality, a superego, which is another structure of our personality, and these two guys are constantly competing for what we should do or how we should think or how we should behave. And then we have this third structure of personality called the ego, okay? And the ego is mediating. It's compromising between the id and the superego. So the id of our personality is saying, I want to do that now. I want this now. The superego is saying, it's not right to do that. We shouldn't do that. Let's pull back, okay? It's kind of more of like your reserved side. And this is more of like your go, I want to do it side. And then ego is trying to balance the wants and the desires of the id and the superego. Okay, so ego is balancing, it is mediating the wants, desires of the id and the superego. So let's get into this a little deeper. Okay, so when we're talking about the id, that is basically the devil on your shoulder. That is how I want you to think of it. The id is the devil on your shoulder. It is your instincts that are saying, hey, do this. It's kind of like your primitive impulse, your desire for instant gratification. I want this now. I want it. I almost think of this also as like the toddler that's just like, give me what I want, right? So it's kind of like that. It's the devil on your shoulder that's telling you, do this. It pushes you to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And because this id is pushing you to seek pleasure. It is called typically the pleasure principle because it's completely submerged in the unconscious. And it's just kind of an instinct that's driving you to do certain things. Freud called this the force that drives the pleasure principle, the libido, but today the libido specifically has a sexual connotation, so we don't tend to call it that anymore. It is more than just sexual urges or sexual instincts for the id. It's literally anything that in your mind, your first thought is, I want that, I need that now. Okay, so the id is the devil on the shoulder, pushing you to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Just instant gratification, right? On the other hand, the superego, this one is the angel on your shoulder. This is the break to the id, right? It's saying, no, don't do that. No, let's do something different. So this is a rigid structure of morality or consciousness. So this is your kind of right versus wrong. So like I said, it's the angel on your shoulder. It's the morality going, this is the right thing to do. How do we determine what is the right thing to do? Well, we develop that during childhood because of the society and the standards that our parents put on us. So we learn what is right and what is wrong based on what society tells us is right or wrong and how our parents kind of reinforce us to behave. In the same sense that your parents are like, or society tells you, like, don't wear hats indoors, or, always say bless you when someone sneezes. Those are things that society says is right. And there's certain things that society says is wrong. So your superego is always pushing you to do what society says or parents say you should do. Okay, so this is kind of like the should of you should act this way or you should not act this way. It is the angel on your shoulder kind of putting the brakes or trying to put the brakes on the devil on your shoulder. They're both, like I said, they're both kind of fighting with each other. And then in between these two guys is the ego. And that is the reality. The ego is kind of you. It's you as a person. And it's trying to balance the devil on your shoulder and the angel on your shoulder. So it's trying to compromise between the two. We can't always operate from pleasure and desire and instincts. And we can't also always go based on the angel on our shoulder and tell us to do what is socially acceptable and moral. Because sometimes we have to break that a little bit. Even in the sense of like if your parents in society tell you you need to be a doctor, you got to be a doctor, blah, blah, blah. That's not always realistic. And that's not always what you want. And so sometimes you have to kind of compromise and pull back on the superego a bit. Okay? So the ego, you, the guy in the middle, is trying to compromise and satisfy the wishes of the id, the devil on the shoulder, while also being responsive to the superego, the angel on the shoulder. So like I said, this one's operating in the reality, which is where we currently are, is reality. It's involving rational thought and problem thinking and problem solving. It works as the executive of this three-part system to manage bodily needs and wishes in a socially acceptable way. Okay, so let's try an example of the id, superego, and ego. Let's do an example of this. Okay, so you're hungry. You're walking down the snack aisle of a grocery store, right? Your id says what? What would your id say in this situation? You're walking down the snack aisle of a grocery store and you're really hungry. What's the devil going to say? He's going to say, who cares if you haven't paid? I want that chocolate now. Give it to me now. I don't care. Eat it. All right. So he's going to push you because your instinct is I'm hungry. I want to eat. I want to do that. Right. So he's going to say, do it. If you haven't paid, I don't care. You're hungry. Eat it now. What's the angel on the shoulder going to say? What do you think the angel's going to say and go against this guy? The superego, the angel on the shoulder, is going to say, you should be ashamed of yourself for even thinking of wanting the chocolate without paying first. So your superego is going to go, No, how dare you think about eating something that you haven't paid for or taking something that you haven't paid for? That is awful. Okay? But we're still hungry, right? So the ego now has to mediate between these two. So, how do we think the ego will try to balance and compromise between these two conflicting desires? On one hand, we have one saying, eat it now, I'm so hungry, who cares that we haven't paid? And then we have the other saying, how dare you, clutch my pearls, how dare you think about eating a snack before paying? That's so awful. No, you shouldn't, and you should just wait until you pay for it. So, how do we compromise? Right? The ego compromising for both the id and the superego. The ego is going to say, all right, I'll eat the chocolate so that way my hunger is gone, but I'm going to keep the wrapper in the cart and I'm going to pay for it on the way out. Okay? So we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. We're compromising and saying, I'm really hungry. I'll go ahead and eat it, but I will pay for it. Okay? I will pay for it. It's not like I'm going to stuff the wrapper behind something and try to hide it and, act like I didn't eat it. I will pay for it, but I'm so hungry I'm going to eat it now. So, same thing. Both kind of the people on your shoulder are compromised. They're both getting what they want. They both getting what they're wishing for, but in more of a reality way, right? So the ego is compromising between the two. You can also kind of think of this as the cat in the hat. There is a video with this. I'm not going to play the video right now, but you can go back and watch it if you want to in the slides. But if you can kind of think about the id and the superego and the ego as the cat in the hat. And if you go back and you watch this and think about it as in terms of the devil on your shoulder, the angel on your shoulder, and then what you actually do, like the compromise, you can see these three personality structures played out by the different characters in the story, which is kind of interesting. Another aspect of the psychodynamic theory is this idea that the conflict between the devil on our shoulder and the angel on our shoulder leads to anxiety. And we try to cope with this anxiety by using defense mechanisms. Okay? So, the devil and the angel on our shoulder, when they have conflicts, it leads us to anxiety. And we cope with that anxiety through using defense mechanisms. What are defense mechanisms? They are unconscious. Okay, so when I say that, that means we are not aware that we are doing this. So if you see people doing this, they're most likely not aware that they are using this or engaging in this defense mechanism. But it is an unconscious strategy that the mind uses to protect itself from that anxiety. Okay, so a defense mechanism is an unconscious, we are unaware of it, a strategy that the mind uses to protect itself from anxiety or distress. The ones that I kind of want you to know is the first three and then realization. So we have denial, we have repression, we have projection, and rationalization. And there is more than that. You're welcome to go through it because if you are interested in it, defense mechanisms are kind of interesting. But in terms of the test and the content I want you to know denial, repression, projection, and rationalization. Denial is literally just refusing to acknowledge the source of anxiety. So, for the example, Tanya has been diagnosed with cancer, but refuses to get treatment, saying her symptoms are caused by something other than cancer. So, a pure just denial that there is a conflict or pure denial that there is something going on. I also like to think of this in terms of like, if you think of this as an example of like, let's say you have a friend, Samantha or Sam. Let's just say Sam. Let's say you have a friend, Sam, who you have noticed has lost a lot of weight recently. And you've noticed that every time you hang out with them, they're not really eating, or if they do eat, they're not really eating much. And you start to get a little concerned about them. And so you ask them, you're like, hey, Sam, like, what's going on? Like, I'm noticing these patterns. Like, do you maybe have an eating disorder, or is this something that's going on? Let's say Sam truly does have an eating disorder, but the conflict between the id of eat your food, eat it now, eat, and the superego saying, no, don't do that, or vice versa, Actually, it may be vice versa. But either way, this conflict is leading to anxiety. And so Sam may be starting to use these defense mechanisms without noticing it. And so you say to Sam, hey, do you have an eating disorder? Is this something that you're going through? And Sam goes, no, no, that's so silly. I don't have an eating disorder. Like, it's just that, like, I've been working out a little bit more recently, or, it's just some other thing. I think I'm just, like my metabolism's kicked in. They're just basically refusing that anything is happening or that anything is going on. They're denying that when it really is. So refusing to acknowledge the source of anxiety between eating and not eating or whatever. The repression is basically repressing the memory or repressing it from your mind. So your mind is basically like anytime Sam would maybe skip meals or Sam decides to not eat, it's literally like your brain throws it out, just completely tosses it in the trash and is pushing it, repressing it from your mind. So you might say to Sam, hey Sam, like I noticed that you didn't eat yesterday during dinner whenever we went out to cook out. Like, is everything okay? Sam's gonna go, really? I don't remember that. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no memory of not eating last night. Like, I have no idea what anybody got. Like, just completely repressing the memory. And once again, this is unconscious. They're unaware that they're doing these things. Okay, so that would be repression. Projection would be saying you're projecting that anxiety or that thing onto somebody else. So, same thing. You ask Sam, hey, I've noticed that you've been losing a lot of weight. I've been noticing that you're not really eating as much when we go out. Like, what's going on? And Sam goes, oh, no, I'm fine. But Jamie, I think we should check on, because Jamie, I've noticed, has been doing, I think Jamie's doing drugs, or like, I think Jamie's doing this. It's kind of projecting that something unacceptable is going on with somebody else, so that way the attention's not on them and their issues, it's on this other person. So it's projecting what's going on with them to somebody else. So it might be like Sam being like, no, I don't think I have an eating disorder, but I do think Jamie has an eating disorder. I think we should check in with them and see how they're doing. So it's projecting that feeling or that unacceptable thing onto somebody else. Rationalization is literally trying to rationalize what's happening. So it's kind of the opposite of denial. They're saying, oh yeah, this is happening, but it's kind of like rationalizing why it's happening. So coming up with some sort of what they think is a logical reason or excuse for that behavior that would normally be or otherwise be shameful. Not that it's shameful to have an eating disorder. This is purely just the example that I'm going with. But rationalization, so same thing. It would be like, oh, hey, Sam, I've noticed you haven't been eating as much. I noticed you've been losing a lot of weight. Like, what's going on? Do you have an eating disorder? And them saying, oh, no, I think everybody, at this age just, has eating issues. And, I think everybody has a little bit of an eating disorder. Or, like, I'm just, yeah, they're kind of rationalizing and coming up with like a reason or excuse for that behavior and just being like, yeah, well, I think everyone just kind of has an eating disorder, right? Like, I mean, I noticed you didn't eat your broccoli, do I need to check in with you? Or coming up with some reason of being like, oh, well, I didn't eat because, I was allergic to the food. And coming up with and being like, well, I'm just super picky, like kind of coming up with a reason or excuse for that behavior that makes it seem not as intense or not as severe. So another part of the psychodynamic theory is what's called a Freudian slip. And I'm not going to test you on this, but I do think this is interesting. I may actually show this video just because I think it's funny. This Freudian slip is basically this idea that we hold unconscious, like he says, unconscious wants and desires. We hold unconscious feelings about things. And a Freudian slip is when we accidentally slip up and say our unconscious desires out loud, okay? Or we slip up and accidentally say what we're truly wanting without meaning to or without even knowing that we're doing it. If you've never seen it before, Friends, the TV show Friends, Ross has a Freudian slip where he accidentally says the wrong girl's name at his wedding. Okay, so he dated a girl who's attending his wedding and accidentally says her name instead of who he's truly there to actually marry. And this would be a really great example of a Freudian slip, basically showing how your unconscious thoughts and feelings and desires accidentally slip out. Okay, so let's watch the video.
Friends, family, are gathered to celebrate here today the joyous union of Ross and Emily. Now, Ross, repeat after me. I, Ross,
I, Ross,
take thee, Emily,
take thee, Rachel. Emily. Emily.
Shall I go on?
He said Rachel, right? Do you think I should go up there?
Yes, do go on.
I think we'd better start again. Yes. Ross, repeat after me. I, Ross,
I, Ross,
take thee, Emily,
take thee, Emily. I don't think there'd be anybody else.
as my lawfully wedded wife in sickness and in health, till death parts us.
As my lawfully wedded wife, in sickness and in health, until death parts us. Really, I do. Emily.
You have the rings? Emily, place this ring on Ross's finger as a symbol of your bond everlasting. Ross, place this ring in Emily's hand as a symbol of the love that encircles you forever.
Happy to.
Ross and Emily have made their declarations, and it gives me great pleasure to declare them husband and wife. You may kiss the bride.
Okay, so that was a little example of a Freudian slip, basically when your unconscious desires and wants accidentally come into light and accidentally come out even when you're not trying to. So next we move on from the psychodynamic approach and start talking about a humanistic approach. The humanistic approach kind of came up in opposition to the bleak and dark view of people, because there was a lot of theories coming out that basically said that humans kind of stink. Humans have a lot of like really questionable feelings about things. And so this kind of emerged in almost like a positivity kind of way. So the humanistic approach of personality really emphasizes how your unique goodness and your growth and your self-understanding influence your personality. And the two really big parts of this is the conditions of worth that are placed on you, and then the unconditional positive regard that people give you. But the ultimate goal of humanistic approach is self-actualization, which is basically achieving your full potential. However, to get to self-actualization, you need to grow as a person and get a better understanding of yourself. And he came up with this in kind of a way to approach personality in terms of our relationships that we have. And a lot of it honestly kind of stems from almost parenthood and like childhood and your parents raising you. So conditions of worth and unconditional positive regard is specifically talking about when you were a child. A condition of worth is basically saying, I am placing a condition on my love for you. I will only show you love. I will only show you affection when you act or when you behave in a way that I think is acceptable. So if I am your parent, and this is the example, if let's say you get a C in a class and you are my child, and I say, of course you get a C. I'm not going to make your favorite dinner tonight like I told you I was, or I'm not going to watch that video game that you're playing, or I'm not going to hang out with you, or I'm not going to tell you that I love you this week because you made a C on that test or you made a C in that class. That is placing a condition on your worth. Okay, so that means that I only love you, or the parents only show affection or love when the child is doing what the parent wants them to do. It is placing a condition and makes the child feel, I am only worthy if I am doing these things. So Carl Rogers, the one who said that, came up with this humanistic approach, is basically saying that as a parent, you don't want to place conditions of worth on your children. That love and acceptance, especially during childhood, is incredibly important. And when parents provide conditional love, when the parent does, what the parents want them to do and tries to live up to their parents' standards, it kind of creates this discrepancy between the child's sense of self. We talked about sense of self, right? It's a discrepancy between the child's sense of self and how their parents evaluate them. And so because there's this difference between how the child sees themselves and what the parent wants and how the parent sees them, it's creating this personality. It's leading to this development of personality based on what the parents want rather than truthfully how the child is or wants to be. So the other part of this is the unconditional positive regard. So what Carl Rogers is saying is basically we want to give children unconditional, so once again, no conditions of worth, unconditional love and support. So no matter what the child does, no matter what the child, how they act, no matter what kind of, how their personality develops, you don't want to express, how do I word this? You don't want to diminish them. Yes, you might still be able to say, like, I don't approve of what you're doing. Like even in this example, like, hey, we're not allowed to draw on the walls, but I love the fact that you're so creative. Let's see if we can do this creative thing on a different canvas, right? Still expressing love and comfort and, positive regard to your child and still giving them love and affection even when they do something wrong or even if they're not doing something exactly like how you want them to. That is the idea of unconditional positive regard. So parents are either putting these conditions on their children or giving them unconditional positive regard. And Carl Rogers says the best way parents can help children develop their true personalities is to give this unconditional positive regard. You can still disapprove of things, but the child's personality is able to develop freely, and it's not like you're going to love or not love your child based on the personality that they develop. But that's basically the humanistic approach, is basically the way that personality develops can either be helped or hindered by our parents and the relationships we have with other people. Then we have the social cognitive approach, okay? So this is basically saying that our behaviors are part of our personality, and our personality is based on how we think about two things: how we expect reinforcement and the values that we place on particular reinforcement. So expectancy theory, basically saying how we expect things to happen, it changes our personality, right? So the influence of how we think is influencing our personality, and our behaviors are part of that. Okay, so let me explain this in a different way. There's basically two kind of ways that you can think about life, okay? You can either think that you make things happen, that you are in control of your destiny and the things that are happening, or you think things happen passively. Things are happening to me, but I have no choice in the matter. I have no say in this. I have no teeth in it, okay? So basically, this guy was saying that your personality depends on if you are what kind of locus of control you have and what you expect to happen. So if you expect things to happen to you, you're going to act and have a different personality than someone who says, no, I am in active control of my life and the things that happen to me. Okay? So when I say locus of control, that is basically just meaning what can you control, right? It is where you're deciding control is coming from. If control is coming from you, You have an internal locus of control. If you think that you can control your life and your outcomes, that is internal locus of control. It's you saying, I am an active participant in choosing the things that happen to me, who I am and how I am, and I make things happen. I determine my future. My passion and hard work help me to achieve my goals, and I am in control of my life and the direction that it takes. On the other hand, if you are someone who thinks that control is from external things, okay? It's not you, it's things that are outside of your control. And you're more passive, right? Things happen to me. There's nothing I can do about my future. Then you might be more of an external locus of control, which once again will influence your personality and how you behave based on what you expect to happen. So if you are kind of like, there's nothing I can do about my future, why even bother trying? It is what it is. Whatever is meant to happen will happen. You go with the flow. Maybe you feel like luck or fate or religion kind of control your future, but it's not something you can actively change. Then you might be more of an external locus of control kind of person. So same thing, you're going to want to know the internal locus of control and you're going to want to know the external locus of control. So even in the same way, like let's say, for example, there is a situation where your car breaks down, right? If you have the personality of being an internal locus of control, then you might be like, all right, I may have had a part in this, like I didn't get my oil changed, but I can go ahead and get that fixed now and my car will run great and everything will be fine. But like I probably had like a part of that, I take accountability for it. If you're more of an external locus of control and things just kind of happen to you, then it's kind of like, okay, my car broke down, God did this to me, he put the thing on the road that flattened my tire, or maybe it's fate, or it's just bad luck that this happened, but it's not necessarily something I did, it's just that this thing passively happened to me, but I played no part in it. This also is a good example for being a college student, right? Do you think that you control the grades that you get every semester? Do you think that you control the GPA you have and the outcomes of your future? And if you get an internship or a job, if you're like, yeah, I'm 100% in control of the grades that I get by studying and taking care of and doing tutoring and all of these different things, and by taking internships and networking, you might be more of an internal locus of control. If you're like, no, I am in control of that, I determine the future I have. If, on the other hand, you're like, I don't really control what grades I have because it depends on the instructor and how they teach, and it depends on if the instructor likes me, and it depends on if my advisor puts me in the right classes, and it depends on, like the way that I'm feeling that day, or, like whatever. Like, it's kind of like things are happening to me. These grades get assigned to me. I got an F and I don't really know why. It is what it is. Then you might be more of an external locus of control, where you're kind of like, life will sort itself out. I'll find an internship, I'll find a job, but I don't need to make really like active steps towards it. Then we have the trait approaches. Okay, so this is another way of thinking about personality where it's purely based on the characteristics that people have. So, and by what I mean by this is it's their tendency to act in a certain way over time and across circumstances. So just kind of how like we described personality in the beginning of this. Except the traits kind of exist on a continuum. They kind of exist on the spectrum. And most people tend to fall somewhere in the middle, okay? And few are really at the true extremes. And what I mean by that is if we're talking about the trait of being outgoing, right? Or being introverted or extroverted, a majority of people are going to fall somewhere in the middle, where sometimes they're outgoing and sometimes they're shy. It just kind of depends. So a majority of people will fall in the middle and be this average in that trait. Some people will be all the way over here and be extremely outgoing. And then you're going to have some people over here who are just extremely shy and not really wanting to talk to people. And then people here who are just like screaming and, going crazy and, being, like the life of the party or whatever. So, and this is what I mean by a continuum. It's a spectrum. You're not going to be perfectly, outgoing or perfectly shy. You're going to be probably somewhere in the middle or somewhere within this kind of range. And the trait theory that we're specifically going to talk about is the 5-factor trait theory, okay, or the 5-factor model. And it's called the Big Five because there's 5 different traits that it goes over. And it says that these are the big 5 personality traits that everybody has, or that like really define personality. Okay, so, and I always say a good way to remember this is the word ocean. Okay, so O is openness to experience. Actually, I think I have this on the next slide. C is conscientiousness. Yeah, it's right here. Okay, so O is openness to experiences. C is conscientiousness. E is extroversion. A is agreeableness. And N is neuroticism. Okay, so when we're talking about openness to experience, we're talking about being open to experiences, right? So if you're high in being open to experiences, then you're going to be a little bit more curious. You're going to be a little bit more creative, a little bit more non-conforming, because you're going to be open to trying a whole lot of new things. If you're not very high, if you're kind of low on the openness to experiences, then you're going to be a little bit more conventional and uncreative. You're going to be a little bit more down to earth, okay? For conscientiousness, if you're high in conscientiousness, you're going to be more organized, more neat, more tidy, more reliable. Whereas on the other hand, if you score low on conscientiousness, then you might kind of describe yourself as a little bit more spontaneous. Maybe you're a little bit more careless with kind of things, like you're not really paying close attention to things. Conscientiousness, if you're a high scorer, you might kind of be more detail oriented in a sense. Extroversion, if you are high in extroversion, you're going to be talkative, you're going to be sociable, maybe more optimistic or affectionate. If you're low in extroversion, you might be more reserved, comfortable being alone, kind of staying in the background, not really wanting the spotlight to be on you. If you are high in agreeableness, then people are going to trust you. You're going to be more helpful maybe to people. People are going to find you more helpful. People are going to find you more good-natured. If you score lower on agreeableness, then people might find you maybe a bit aggressive. People might find you rude, or people might find you uncooperative. Neuroticism. If you are a high scorer of neuroticism, that does not mean you are crazy. That does not mean you are neurotic. It's simply looking at your temperament. Okay, so neuroticism is looking at if you have high neuroticism, it's basically saying that your moods fluctuate. And it could be intensely or it could be frequently having your mood fluctuate, okay? So you might be a little bit more of like a worrywart. You might be a little bit more insecure, a little bit more anxious. Whereas someone low on neuroticism, their moods are going to be more stable. They're going to be more relaxed, more calm and secure, okay? So like I said, it's a continuum. You can either score low on this or you can score high on this, but majority are going to be right in this middle. Okay, so there is a lot of considerable evidence that supports the 5-factor theory, and it is very widely used, even across cultures, among children and adults, even with completely different questionnaires. These 5 factors continue to come up for personality. So I would say that in terms of theories, this one is the one that is definitely getting a lot more support and a lot more kind of like leaning into at this day and age. And it does also have some correlations where it can help kind of predict or correlate to different things like satisfaction of the job that you have and like the satisfaction with your marriage and the satisfaction overall with your life, just depending on where you fall on this kind of trait theory spectrum. So that is the trait theory. And the last thing we're going to talk about is kind of in regards to self and personality is kind of how going back to nature versus nurture and how nature versus nurture impacts our personality. The thing is I always said this before and I'll say it again, there is a overwhelming evidence that genes do influence nearly all of the personality traits you have, like 40 to 60%. And so what that means is 40 to 60%, about half of your personality, is truly coming down from your parents, the genes that were passed down through your parents. So a lot of times you will see that there is a lot of overlap between your personality and your parents' personality. But there's not a specific gene, there's not a specific part of our DNA that is like, oh, you're having this personality trait. Instead, it's the combination of hundreds of genes that you have that influence your personality and what's showing up versus what's not showing up. And how we found this out is by looking at studies of identical twins, okay? So some research studies have shown that identical twins are more similar than non-identical twins in personality traits. So what that's basically saying is there is this gene component because of the fact that identical twins are more similar than siblings who are not identical twins. So me and my, sister, we have a 10-year difference between us. We're gonna have some personality similarities because we share same parents, right? But in someone who's identical twins, who share the same kind of genes and the same, literally the same genes, they are going to have even more personality similarities. And if you even had, if you had identical twins, like in your high school, or if you know a pair of identical twins, you will see this, where there is going to be some sort of personality differences. They're not exact clones, they're not copies of each other, but there is going to be a lot of overlap between the two identical twins. So here is some research that's showing how, using the 5-factor trait theory, the identical twins have much higher correlation in these specific traits than fraternal twins. Okay, so identical twins, you can see the clear difference on the scores that they have for these 5 traits compared to fraternal twins who are born at the same time but from 2 different eggs, because their genes are a little different, or sorry, 2 different eggs, different sperms. But you can see that there is a clear difference between how they scored. And I mean, mind you, we're looking at tenth decimal places here. So you might be like, it's not huge, but there are definitely ones, like this one's only like a point difference or 0.1 of a difference, but some of them are much higher. But this has been studied enough that we do know that this is genuinely true when it comes to identical twins. There's also something called the reticular activating system, which is part of the brain that processes the degree of arousal and alertness and the starting and ending stages of sleep. And they actually found that this reticular activating system in our brain is kind of how we figure out the difference between someone who is introverted and someone who is extroverted. So depending on which one you are, you can kind of figure out what it is based on how your brain reacts to things. So introverts are over aroused and extroverts are under aroused. And when I'm talking about arousal, I'm not talking about like sexual arousal. I'm specifically talking about the arousal like almost in their environment. So think of this as like how much stimulation you're getting in your environment based on like the sound that's around you, the amount of light that's around you. Think about your senses. Are your senses being over aroused? There's too much stimulation in your environment? Introverts tend to have an over aroused reticular activating system. So because of that, they seek out solitude because it has fewer stimulation, it has fewer stimuli. So it allows the reticular activating system to kind of calm down a little bit. Extroverts, on the other hand, have an under aroused reticular activating system. And what that means is their reticular, I'm going to just say RAS. So their RAS is under aroused, so it's not doing as much. So what they do is they try to seek out new situations, new emotional experiences. They want new stimulation, new experiences, new sensory stuff, because they want this part to be more aroused. Like their brain's literally like below what it should be, this optimal level. And so extroverts tend to seek out new things to make it more aroused, more stimulated. And then we're also going to talk about the environment. Okay, because yes, as biology does have a large part of our personality, life events also change your personality. So yes, genes predispose you to have certain personality traits or characteristics, but whether the genes are expressed depends on the unique circumstances that you face during development. That could be during the womb, that could be during childhood, that could even be during like a teenager, an adult. Your life experiences swap on and swap off certain aspects of your personality. And so some things may get turned on or some things may get turned off depending on what you experience during your life. And I actually did talk about this. I totally forgot that this was at the end, but we talked about temperament a little bit earlier, right? And when we were talking about personality. And this is exactly what I was talking about is the biologically based tendency to feel or act in certain ways. When you are a child, you have a certain temperament. You might be more your mood might be less stable. You might be more like outgoing. You might be more introverted. You have different activity levels. Some children just want to sit there with the iPad, and then some children are like, no, I want to go out and run around for 5 hours. And this temperament that you have is extremely stable. So they found that temperament is similar from when you're 14 years old to when you're 13 years old. So me as a 14-year-old had the same temperament that I have now as a 30-year-old, right? So it's the same. It's the same temperament that you carry with you through life. And like I said, it has 3 aspects. So how active you were, your energy levels. So like if you were a child with a lot of energy, you probably have a lot of energy, especially as an adult. Emotionality, so same thing, the intensity of your emotional reactions, right? If you were a really big crier, if you were a really big like drama queen, like as a child, you're gonna be that way as an adult too. I actually just experienced this recently with my nieces and nephews. Is there's a baby in the family that I said their emotional temperament is a little extreme. It's a little intense. They couldn't find their shoes, and this is like a 3-year-old. He couldn't find his shoes, and so he walks over to his mom and he goes, I can't find my shoes. And he's like crying and like we're like starting to. And she goes, that's okay. The mom goes, that's okay. Just go out in your socks. And he goes, oh, okay. And then just instantly calms down. So he has like a wide range of emotionality where it's like very intense and then goes back to being calm. That temperament he will most likely carry with him into an adulthood. And then lastly, sociability. So the tendency to affiliate with other kids, the tendency to be sociable with other children, that is also carried with you. So are you like a kid that liked to play by themselves, or are you a kid that liked to be out with all of your friends and play in the woods with like 5 other people and all your cousins and all this? That will follow you and be relatively stable even into adulthood. And this is biologically based. Okay, but these are the different personality traits, the different aspects of personality. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this content. There will be homework assignments and quizzes related to this information. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.